"Sir, can I slip under your coat?" the trembling black girl whispered desperately as the iron beast thundered through the desert night, her eyes wide with terror as boots echoed closer down the train car aisle. The other passengers sneered and whispered among themselves. Another runaway who'd be dragged back in chains by morning, if she was lucky. They turned their backs, leaving her to face the hunters alone. But the silent mountain of a man in the weathered duster coat sat motionless in the corner, his calloused hands gripping a book he wasn't reading. Something flickered behind his steel-gray eyes, a recognition of desperation he knew too well. What she didn't know was that helping her would expose secrets that could destroy them both, or forge an alliance that would reshape the entire territory. Would the mysterious rancher become her salvation, or had she just sealed both their fates? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The train car reeked of sweat and tobacco smoke as Ada pressed herself against the narrow bathroom door. Through the thin wood, she heard passengers muttering about her kind not belonging in decent company. Their words cut deep, but not as deep as the memory of Cornelius Whitmore's cold smile when he'd purchased her like livestock. She touched the bruise on her wrist where his son had grabbed her during their forced wedding ceremony. 3 days ago, she'd been Mrs. Jacob Whitmore. Now she was a fugitive with nowhere to run, except forward into an unknown desert. Heavy boots thundered down the aisle outside. The bounty hunters had boarded at the last stop. Ada recognized their voices from the plantation. They would drag her back to face worse than death. The bathroom door rattled. Someone tried the handle. Ada slipped out through the crowd of passengers returning to their seats. She needed to disappear among them, but every face turned away in disgust. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A man spat toward the window. At the far end of the car sat a giant of a man in a long duster coat. His weathered hands held a leather-bound book, but his steel-gray eyes scanned the crowd with the wariness of someone who'd faced his own hunters. Something about his stillness drew her like a magnet. The bounty hunters entered the car behind her. Time slowed to heartbeats. Ada approached the silent rancher, her legs trembling beneath her torn dress. Up close, she saw scars across his knuckles and a depth in his eyes that spoke of hidden pain. "Sir, can I slip under your coat?" she whispered. The rancher froze. For a moment that stretched like eternity, he stared at her face. Then, without a word, he opened his long coat. Ada pressed herself against his side as the fabric fell around them both. The wool smelled of sage and leather. His heartbeat drummed steady against her ear as Boots approached their seat. "You seen a runaway girl come through here?" The lead hunter's voice carried the authority of violence. "No." The rancher's response came flat and final. "Mind if we look around?" "Free country." The hunters moved through the car, questioning passengers who eagerly pointed toward other sections of the train. Ada felt the rancher's breathing remain perfectly controlled even as her own came in desperate gasps. When the hunters finally moved on, Ada expected to be pushed away. Instead, the rancher kept his coat closed around them both. Minutes passed like hours. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Ada nodded against his chest. She'd seen their type before. They'd search every inch of this train before giving up. "Train stops in Tucson in an hour," he continued. "They'll have the station surrounded. Then I'm dead." Something shifted in his posture. Maybe not. The rancher's eyes moved to the window where desert stretched endlessly under starlight. Ada followed his gaze and understood. The wilderness would kill her just as surely as the hunters, but at least it would be on her terms. "You know this country?" she asked. "Better than most. Why would you help me?" He studied her face again with those penetrating gray eyes. Everyone deserves a second chance. The simple words carried weight beyond their meaning. This man had secrets of his own. As the train began to slow for a water stop, the rancher stood and gathered his belongings. Ada noticed he moved with purpose, like someone accustomed to making life or death decisions quickly. "What's your name?" she whispered. "Jonas. I'm Ada." He nodded once, then moved toward the rear of the car. Ada followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the windows, she glimpsed riders in the distance. More hunters, positioning themselves along the tracks. Jonas stopped at the back door of the train car. The desert rushed past in a blur of rock and shadow. "My ranch is 2 days north," he said. "If you can make it that far." "If we can make it." He turned to look at her, and for the first time, something like surprise crossed his features. "This isn't your fight. It became yours when you opened that coat." The train whistle screamed as they approached the water stop. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness ahead. Too many lanterns. The hunters had called for reinforcements. Jonas checked the distance to the ground as the train continued to slow, still moving too fast for a safe jump, but their window was closing rapidly. "On 3, he said. Ada gathered her skirts and positioned herself beside him. The desert air whipped through the open door, carrying the scent of sage and danger. 1. The train began to brake harder. Voices shouted from the station platform. 2. Ada saw muzzle flashes in the distance. The hunters weren't taking chances this time. 3. They leaped together into the star-filled darkness, leaving behind the world of law and civilization for the harsh honesty of the wilderness. As they tumbled across the sand and scrub brush, Ada realized she'd traded one impossible situation for another. But this time, she wouldn't face it alone. The desert sun blazed overhead as Jonas and Ada crested the final ridge. Below them sprawled Sage Creek Ranch, but it looked nothing like Ada had expected. Instead of a simple cattle operation, she saw multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. People moved between structures with purpose that seemed too organized for ordinary ranch work. "More than it appears," Jonas said, reading her expression. They descended toward the main house where a young Native American boy emerged from the barn. His dark eyes assessed Ada with the wariness of someone who'd learned to judge strangers quickly. "This is Nate," Jonas said. "He helps run things." The boy nodded politely but kept his distance. Ada understood. Trust came hard in this harsh country. An older man with graying hair and suspicious eyes approached from the bunkhouse. His weathered face carried the kind of hardness that came from too many disappointments. "Hank Walker," Jonas said by way of introduction. "My foreman." Hank's gaze lingered on Ada's torn dress and exhausted face. "Another stray?" "She stays," Jonas replied with finality. Inside the main house, Ada's breath caught. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Maps covered a massive oak table. Documents lay scattered across a desk that belonged in a lawyer's office, not a ranch house. Jonas noticed her staring. "I read. These are legal texts, court records." Ada picked up a bound volume. "Territorial law codes. You can read those?" "My father taught me before he lost everything to gambling debts." The words tasted bitter. "Before he sold me to pay them." Jonas studied her with new interest. "How much schooling?" "Through 8th grade. Then I taught myself." Ada traced the spine of a law book. "Knowledge was the only thing they couldn't take from me." A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Ada saw 3 dusty travelers approaching on foot. A woman clutched a baby, while 2 children stumbled beside her. Their clothes marked them as runaways seeking freedom. "Nate," Jonas called. "Prepare the back rooms." As the family disappeared into the house through a side entrance, Ada began to understand. This wasn't just a ranch. It was a way station. Over the following days, Ada witnessed the operation's true scope. Refugees arrived at night and left before dawn. Jonas coordinated their movements using coded telegrams that arrived daily. Supplies disappeared from storage rooms only to reappear as provisions for travelers heading north. "How long have you been doing this?" Ada asked one evening. 5 years. The authorities don't suspect?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "Some do." Ada noticed how he burned every telegram after reading it, how visitors spoke in whispers and avoided using names, how Hank constantly watched the horizon for unwanted riders. "You're not just a rancher," she said. "No." "Then what?" Jonas turned away, but not before Ada caught something in his expression. Fear mixed with determination. The look of a man carrying dangerous secrets. The next morning brought crisis. A family of 5 arrived with barely the strength to stand. The father had been shot during their escape. The mother wept over her unconscious husband while their children huddled together in terror. "We need a doctor," the woman pleaded. "Nearest one is in town," Hank said grimly. 60 miles. "He won't make it," Jonas said after examining the wound. Ada knelt beside the injured man. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, but infection was setting in. Without proper care, he would die within hours. "I can help," Ada said quietly. "You're not a doctor," Hank protested. "No, but I've read every medical text in that library." Ada met Jonas's eyes. "On the plantation, they made me tend the workers. I learned to treat gunshot wounds and infections. I can save him." Jonas nodded slowly. "What do you need?" Ada worked through the night, drawing on knowledge she'd never expected to use. She cleaned the wound, applied poultices, and monitored the man's fever. By dawn, his breathing had steadied. "How did you know to do that?" Nate asked, watching her change bandages. "I memorized every medical procedure I could find. Knowledge keeps people alive." Jonas observed from the doorway. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed saving." Ada secured the last bandage. "Maybe we all save each other." That afternoon, Jonas found her in the library studying territorial laws. She'd filled several pages with notes about refugee rights and federal jurisdiction. "Find something interesting?" "The law protects people seeking freedom in this territory," Ada said, "but someone would need legal standing to challenge violations in court." Jonas grew very still. "Legal standing?" "A lawyer, or a judge." Ada looked up at him. "Someone with authority to file proper complaints against those who break federal law." The silence stretched between them until Jonas sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table, and Ada noticed they shook slightly. "What if I told you there was more to this operation than you know?" "I'd say I already figured that out." "What if I told you I wasn't always a rancher?" Ada set down her pen. "I'd say a man doesn't collect law books and coordinate refugee movements without a reason." Jonas met her eyes directly. "My name is Jonas Cole, former federal judge, officially dead for 3 years." The words hit Ada like physical blows. A judge. A man with the power to change everything. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're not just another refugee." Jonas leaned forward. "You're the missing piece." The revelation changed everything. Ada stared at Jonas across the library table, her mind racing through the implications. A federal judge presumed dead. An underground network operating under his protection. The scope of what they were building here dwarfed anything she'd imagined. "Who wants you dead?" she asked. "Territorial officials I ruled against. Men who profit from keeping certain people in chains." Jonas's voice carried the weight of old wounds. "They made it clear my rulings weren't welcome. So you disappeared. Faked my death. Started over as a rancher." He gestured toward the hidden operation around them. "Found a better way to fight." Ada absorbed this as pieces fell into place. The legal documents, the coded messages, the careful coordination of refugee movements. Jonas wasn't just helping people escape. He was building a shadow legal system. "The missing piece," she repeated. "What did you mean?" "You understand both worlds, the plantation system and territorial law. You can document violations in ways that hold up in court." Before Ada could respond, Hank burst through the door. His face was grim. "Trouble coming. Riders from 3 directions." Jonas moved to the window. In the distance, dust clouds marked the approach of multiple groups, too coordinated to be coincidence. "How many safe houses hit this week?" Ada asked. 5, Nate replied from the doorway. "Same pattern every time." Ada studied the tactical situation with growing unease. "Someone's feeding them information." "Impossible," Hank said firmly. "Everyone here is loyal." But Ada had spent years surviving by reading people and situations. The timing of these raids felt too precise. The attackers knew too much about movements and schedules. We need to disappear the current refugees, Jonas decided. Use the northern route. As they prepared for evacuation, Ada noticed something that made her blood chill. The approaching riders weren't just bounty hunters. She recognized Deputy Crawford's badge glinting in the sunlight. Federal authority was closing in. They're not here for just the refugees, she told Jonas quietly. They're here for you. The realization hit them both simultaneously. If Crawford suspected Judge Cole was alive, the entire operation was compromised. Years of careful work would vanish overnight. We can't keep running, Ada said as they watched the riders draw closer. We need to turn this around. What are you suggesting? Ada's mind worked furiously through possibilities. Stop reacting. Start controlling the situation. They outnumber us 10-1. Numbers don't matter if we're smarter. Ada turned to face the group. We set a trap. Hank shook his head vigorously. Too dangerous. More dangerous than letting them pick us off one by one? Ada pulled out paper and began sketching. We feed false information. Make them come to us on our terms. Jonas studied her rough map. You're talking about using ourselves as bait. I'm talking about ending this. Ada's voice carried conviction that surprised even her. We identify who's betraying us and stop them permanently. The plan took shape quickly. They would stage a fake refugee convoy, spread different details to each person they suspected, then see which version reached the raiders. What if you're wrong about the traitor? Nate asked. Then we're no worse off than we are now. As afternoon faded to evening, Ada implemented her strategy. She told Hank the convoy would leave at midnight heading east. She mentioned to the telegraph operator that departure was set for dawn going west. To Deputy Crawford's known informants in town, she leaked information about a southern route. Jonas watched her work with growing admiration. You've done this before. Survival teaches you to think several moves ahead. They spent the night making final preparations. Ada documented everything she could about the network's legal protections and Crawford's jurisdictional overreach. If her plan failed, at least there would be evidence for whoever came after them. Just before dawn, Hank approached with disturbing news. Found tracks near the north pasture. Someone's been watching us. Ada felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The surveillance explained how the raiders always seemed one step ahead. How long have you noticed the tracks? Past few weeks. The timeline matched perfectly with when the raids had intensified. Someone was providing real-time intelligence to their enemies. As the false convoy prepared to depart, Ada positioned herself where she could observe everyone's reactions. Years of reading faces for survival had taught her to spot tells that others missed. Deputy Crawford's arrival at dawn confirmed her suspicions about his involvement, but something felt wrong about the pattern of information flow. The betrayal went deeper than she'd initially suspected. The convoy rolled out with empty wagons disguised to look like they carried refugees. Ada and Jonas followed at a distance, ready to spring their counterattack. Within an hour, riders emerged from concealment along the eastern route. They moved with the confidence of men who knew exactly where to find their targets. Hank was right about the timing, Ada murmured, but as she watched the raiders' positioning, a chill ran down her spine. These men weren't just intercepting refugees. They were setting up an ambush designed to capture everyone alive. Jonas, she said urgently, this isn't about stopping the network. What do you mean? Look at their formation. They want prisoners, not bodies. Ada's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. Crawford knows who you really are. The trap they'd set was about to spring on them instead. In trying to expose the traitor, they'd walked directly into a carefully orchestrated capture operation. But Ada wasn't finished yet. As the raiders closed in on the decoy convoy, she pulled out the documents she'd been preparing all night. Evidence of federal crimes, proof of Crawford's corruption, legal ammunition that could destroy their enemies if it reached the right hands. Whatever happens next, she told Jonas, make sure these papers survive. The final confrontation was about to begin. The ambush unfolded exactly as Ada had predicted, but not in the way she'd expected. Deputy Crawford led the charge against the decoy convoy, his men surrounding the empty wagons with military precision. But when they ripped open the canvas covers and found nothing but supplies, Crawford's rage echoed across the desert. "Where are they?" he shouted at his men. Ada and Jonas watched from their concealed position on the ridge above. Something was wrong with this picture. Crawford's reaction seemed too genuine, too surprised. He expected to find refugees, Ada murmured. That was the point of the decoy. No. Ada studied Crawford's body language as he paced among the wagons. He's not acting. He really thought they'd be there. Before Jonas could respond, gunfire erupted from the north. Real gunfire. Ada's stomach dropped as she realized the horrible truth. While they'd been setting their trap, another group had attacked the ranch itself. Nate, Jonas breathed. They raced back toward Sage Creek Ranch, abandoning their surveillance of Crawford's frustrated search. Smoke rose from the direction of the main house. The sound of breaking glass carried on the desert wind. As they crested the final ridge, Ada saw 3 men she didn't recognize ransacking the buildings, not Crawford's deputies. These were the original bounty hunters from the train, and they'd brought reinforcements. "How did they find us?" Jonas demanded. Ada's mind raced through the possibilities. The timeline didn't match her theory about the information leak. These men had arrived independently of Crawford's operation. Inside the main house, they found Hank pressed against the wall with a gun to his head. Nate stood frozen near the fireplace, his young face pale with terror. The lead bounty hunter held a knife too close to the boy's throat. "Judge Jonas Cole," the man said with satisfaction. "Cornelius Whitmore sends his regards. Let the boy go. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who harbors stolen property." The bounty hunter's eyes found Ada. "And there's our little runaway bride." Ada stepped forward despite Jonas's restraining hand. "How did you know we were here?" "Your husband's been very thorough, posted rewards in every town from here to Mexico." The man smiled coldly. "Weren't hard to track 2 people traveling together through the desert." The revelation hit Ada like a physical blow. They hadn't been betrayed by someone in the network. Whitmore had simply cast a wide enough net to catch them eventually. But then she noticed something that made her blood freeze. Hank's expression wasn't just fear, it was guilt. "Tell them, old man," the bounty hunter continued. "Tell them how you've been keeping us informed." "Hank!" Jonas's voice carried disbelief and pain. The older man's shoulders sagged. "They threatened Nate." "What?" "Crawford found out about the boy. Threatened to send him to one of those schools where they beat the Indian out of children." Hank's voice cracked. "Said he'd make sure Nate disappeared if I didn't cooperate." Ada felt the second twist hit her like a landslide. Hank wasn't the real traitor. He was being blackmailed. What did Crawford want to know? She demanded. Refugee schedules, supply deliveries. Nothing that would hurt the judge directly. But Crawford's not working alone, Ada realized aloud. He's been feeding information to Whitmore. The bounty hunter's smile widened. Smart girl. Too smart for her own good. Ada's mind raced through the implications. Crawford was using his federal authority to track refugees while taking bribes from plantation owners to return their property. The corruption went straight through the territorial government. "You've been documenting everything," she said to Hank. "Every conversation with Crawford. Had to protect myself somehow." Ada looked at Jonas, seeing the same realization dawn in his eyes. They had evidence of federal corruption at the highest levels. Not just Crawford, but an entire network of officials taking bribes to circumvent territorial law. "Where are those records now?" Jonas asked carefully. "Hidden in the barn." The bounty hunter pressed his knife closer to Nate's throat. "Enough talking. We're taking our prizes and leaving." But Ada had noticed something else during the conversation, the way Hank kept glancing toward the window, the positioning of his body despite the gun at his head. He was trying to signal them about something. Following his gaze, she spotted movement outside. More riders approaching. But these wore different badges. Territorial marshals, not Crawford's corrupt deputies. "Hank," she said quietly, "did you send word to someone else?" The old man nodded slightly. "Territorial governor. Sent copies of everything 3 days ago." The bounty hunter caught the exchange. What are you whispering about? Just wondering how you plan to explain federal crimes to territorial authorities, Ada said loudly. What authorities? Ada smiled for the first time in days. The ones surrounding this house right now. The sound of horses and official voices calling for surrender filled the air outside. The bounty hunters spun toward the windows, suddenly realizing they'd walked into their own trap. But the lead man kept his knife at Nate's throat. Anyone comes through that door, the boy dies. You're outnumbered and outgunned, Jonas said. Let him go and maybe you'll live to see trial. I don't think so, Judge. Ada watched the standoff develop with growing clarity about what needed to happen next. The territorial marshals could handle the bounty hunters, but the real battle was just beginning. Crawford and his network of corruption were still out there, and they'd escalate their efforts once they realized how much evidence existed against them. The war for justice in the territory was about to truly begin. The territorial marshals moved with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they had the bounty hunters disarmed and in custody. The lead man's knife clattered to the floor as Marshal Thompson's deputies overwhelmed the room. Judge Cole, Thompson said, removing his hat respectfully. Good to see you alive. Jonas straightened, and Ada saw him transform before her eyes. The quiet rancher disappeared, replaced by the commanding presence of a federal judge who'd once held sway over entire territories. Marshal Thompson, I trust you received the documentation. Every page. The territorial governor is very interested in Deputy Crawford's activities. Thompson's expression hardened. Along with his associates. Ada pulled the additional papers she'd prepared from her dress. There's more. Financial records showing payments from plantation owners to federal officials, dates, amounts, specific cases where territorial law was violated. Thompson examined the documents with growing amazement. How did you compile all this? I've been documenting everything for months, Ada said. Every illegal seizure, every false arrest, every time Crawford exceeded his authority. She has a gift for legal analysis, Jonas added with quiet pride. The marshal looked between them with new understanding. You two have been building a case. We've been building justice, Ada corrected. Outside, more riders approached. Through the window, Ada recognized Cornelius Whitmore's expensive carriage accompanied by a full escort of private guards. The plantation owner had come personally to reclaim his property. This isn't over, Jonas said grimly. Whitmore entered the house with the arrogance of a man accustomed to buying whatever he wanted. His cold eyes found Ada immediately. There's my wayward bride. I've come to take you home. She's not going anywhere. Jonas stepped forward. I have legal documentation of our marriage. Whitmore produced papers from his coat. Territorial law recognizes the union. Ada had been waiting for this moment. She pulled out her own carefully prepared documents. Territorial law also recognizes that contracts signed under duress are invalid, she said calmly. I have witness statements about the circumstances of my father's death and the coercion involved in that ceremony. Whitmore's confidence wavered. You can't prove coercion. Actually, I can. Ada spread out additional papers. Your own correspondence with Deputy Crawford. You paid him to ensure the marriage would be enforced regardless of territorial statutes protecting women's rights. Marshal Thompson examined the letters with growing interest. These show conspiracy to violate federal law. Where did you get those? Whitmore demanded. Crawford kept copies of everything. Insurance against his criminal associates. Ada's voice carried the steel she'd developed during months of legal preparation. He documented every bribe, every illegal favor, every violation of his federal oath. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Crawford's greed had created a paper trail that exposed the entire corruption network. Judge Cole, Marshal Thompson said formally, the territorial governor has authorized me to request your assistance in prosecuting these crimes. Jonas nodded slowly. I'll need to be officially reinstated. Already handled. Your death has been legally reversed as of yesterday. Ada watched Jonas absorb the magnitude of what was happening. His exile was ending. His ability to fight corruption through proper legal channels was restored. What about the refugees? She asked. The network will be legitimized under territorial protection, Thompson replied. Refugee assistance is now an official territorial program. Whitmore's face purpled with rage. You can't do this. I have investments, contracts, legal standing. You have criminal exposure, Ada said quietly. Conspiracy, bribery, human trafficking, violation of federal statutes. Should I continue? The plantation owner looked around the room, finally understanding that his money couldn't buy him out of this situation. The evidence was too comprehensive, the legal case too solid. Marshal Thompson, Jonas said formally, I recommend immediate arrest warrants for Cornelius Whitmore, Deputy Crawford, and all associated parties documented in these files. Already prepared, Your Honor. As the marshals led Whitmore away in chains, Ada felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried since childhood. The system that had sold her, hunted her, and tried to destroy her was finally facing justice. What happens now? Nate asked quietly. Jonas looked at Ada, and she saw the future taking shape in his eyes. Now we build something better. Over the following weeks, the prosecutions moved forward with devastating efficiency. Ada's documentation proved ironclad in territorial court. Crawford and his network faced decades in federal prison. Plantation owners across 3 territories scrambled to distance themselves from the exposed corruption, but the most significant change was personal. Ada found herself appointed as the territorial advocate for refugee rights, officially empowered to investigate violations and prosecute offenders. Her intelligence and legal knowledge, once sources of suspicion, became tools of legitimate authority. Jonas resumed his position as circuit judge, while maintaining Sage Creek Ranch as the headquarters of the Legal Refugee Assistance Program. The underground network emerged into daylight as an official territorial institution. Hank's role as reluctant informant transformed into respected elder of the operation. His forced cooperation with Crawford became valuable testimony that helped convict the corrupt deputy. Most importantly, his secret was safe. Nate would never face the threat of forced removal again. You did it, Jonas told Ada one evening, as they reviewed case files together. We did it, she corrected. All of us. The trembling girl who had whispered for protection under his coat had become a force of justice that transformed an entire territory. But Ada knew the real victory wasn't in the prosecutions or official appointments. The real victory was that she'd found her voice, her power, and her place in a world that had tried to silence her forever. 6 months later, the autumn sun painted the desert in shades of gold as Ada stood on the porch of Sage Creek Ranch. The transformation was remarkable. What had once been a hidden refuge now bustled openly as the official Territorial Refugee Assistance Center. Families arrived daily, no longer in secret but with legal protection and proper documentation. The main house had expanded with additional wings to accommodate the growing operation. A schoolhouse stood where the old storage barn had been. Children's laughter echoed across the courtyard as Nate helped younger refugees with their lessons. His own education continued without fear, supported by territorial funding and legal protection. Ada adjusted the badge on her jacket. Territorial Advocate for Refugee Rights. The title still felt surreal after months of persecution and hiding. Her morning routine now included reviewing legal petitions instead of watching for bounty hunters on the horizon. Jonas emerged from his study carrying a stack of legal documents. His circuit judge duties took him across the territory monthly, but he always returned to the ranch that had become the heart of their shared mission. The silent rancher had found his voice again in courtrooms where justice mattered more than politics. The Henderson family arrives this afternoon, he said, checking his pocket watch. 5 children, parents fleeing debt bondage in Colorado. I've prepared their intake documents. Full legal protection under the territorial statutes we helped draft. Ada smiled at the irony. Laws she'd helped write now protected others facing the same horrors she'd escaped. Hank approached from the stable, leading a horse prepared for one of the refugee families continuing north to Canada. His transformation had been perhaps the most profound of all. No longer burdened by secrets or threats, he'd embraced his role as grandfather to Nate and protector of the ranch family. His knowledge of desert routes and survival skills proved invaluable for legal refugee assistance. The Peterson family sends word from Calgary, he reported. Safe arrival. Started a farm outside the city. Ada noted the success in her ledger. Hundreds of families had passed through Sage Creek Ranch since the network went legitimate. Each represented a victory against the systems that had once seemed unbreakable. A rider approached from the south. Ada recognized Marshal Thompson's deputy with mail and official communications. The weekly reports had become routine, but they still carried weight. Justice was an ongoing process, not a single victory. Federal court confirmed the final appeals, the deputy announced. Crawford gets 20 years, Whitmore 15. The last of their associates were sentenced yesterday. Ada accepted the official documents with satisfaction. The corruption network that had seemed so powerful 6 months ago lay in ruins. Federal investigators had followed the evidence she'd compiled to uncover violations across 4 territories. Any word on the New Mexico operations? Jonas asked. Shut down completely. Your legal recommendations helped the territorial government restructure their entire refugee assistance program. The ripple effects of their work continued expanding. Other territories requested Ada's expertise in drafting protective legislation. Her combination of first-hand experience and legal knowledge proved uniquely valuable for creating practical solutions. As afternoon faded toward evening, the newest refugees arrived. The Henderson family looked exactly as Ada had once looked. Exhausted, terrified, uncertain whether they could trust another stranger's promise of safety. She saw herself in the mother's eyes, and her father's desperate hope in the man's face. But these refugees faced a different reality than Ada had encountered. Legal protections existed now. Official advocates stood ready to defend their rights. The infrastructure of justice had replaced the desperation of hiding. Welcome to Sage Creek Ranch, Ada told them warmly. You're safe here. The words carried authority backed by law instead of whispered promises in train cars. The transformation felt complete. After settling the new arrivals, Ada found herself walking the familiar path to the ridge where she and Jonas had first planned their counterattack against Crawford's corruption. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, but it no longer represented isolation or danger. It represented freedom and possibilities. Jonas joined her as the sun touched the horizon. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the light paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their partnership had evolved naturally from desperate alliance to deep affection to unshakable love built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Do you ever think about that night on the train? Ada asked. Every day. What would have happened if you'd said no? Jonas considered the question seriously. Someone else would have helped you eventually. You were too determined to let anything stop you permanently. But would we have found each other? I think we were meant to find each other. His hand found hers, calloused from ranch work, but gentle with infinite care. Question is what we build with the time we have. Ada looked back toward the ranch where lights began appearing in windows. Families settling in for their first safe night in months or years. Children preparing for school tomorrow instead of running from hunters. Adults planning futures instead of merely surviving. I asked to slip under your coat, she said softly. You gave me a whole new world. We built this world together. The simple truth of those words encompassed everything they'd accomplished. Individual talents amplified through partnership, legal knowledge combined with lived experience, justice emerging from the synthesis of different perspectives and shared commitment. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ada and Jonas remained on the ridge, no longer hiding from their past, but embracing their future. Below them, Sage Creek Ranch stood as proof that two people with courage and determination could transform not just their own lives, but the entire landscape of possibility for others. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and hope across the vast expanse of freedom they'd claimed together.